The following content is provided under a Creative Commons license. Your support will help MIT OpenCourseware continue to offer high-quality educational resources for free. To make a donation or view additional materials from hundreds of MIT courses, visit MIT OpenCourseware at ocw.mit.edu.
Alrighty. All right, let's get going. So our next module is a variability simulation, and this ties right into the accounts payable case study that Earl just did with you from Rockwell Collins. So our learning objectives for this module is simply to discuss the impact that variability has on process performance when we're done, and we're going to do this in a very experiential way. So why are we concerned about variation? In other circumstances and settings in life, variation might be interesting, nice, or even desirable. But here in our enterprise, in manufacturing and engineering, supply chains, variation is really more of a curse than it is a help for us. And we've seen this at various points during our course these couple of days. So we'd heard about it in cycle time when we talked about the accounts payable module. We saw the challenges in design for manufacturing to try to control variability, and we talked about that in the lean engineering module. And in the quality module, later on this afternoon, we'll talk about process capability, which has to do entirely with variation. As you saw yesterday, reducing process variation is a key step in implementing some of our lean practices, getting standard work done. And reducing variation, in fact, is really the heart of what Six Sigma is, and we'll talk about that later in the quality module today. So what we're going to do here in the next half hour, 40 minutes or so, is really linked to what the rest of the course has been talking about. So we're going to learn about variation in two ways. First, you're going to get to touch it and feel it with the dice and poker chip game that's in front of you now. And then our second exercise will be a computer simulation, where we're going to do a lot of rounds, and we'll try to quickly show you some of the impact that variation has on processes. And in the course of this, we're going to just happen to discover a useful relationship between work in process, cycle time, and takt time, which really doesn't have much to do directly with variation, but it comes nicely out of this simulation. So we talk a little bit about what's called Little's Law towards the end of this module. And then the quality module, which will come directly after this one, I believe, we're going to introduce tools for variation, controlling it, understanding it, and trying to assess its impact on your process capability. So let's move right into the dice game that you have in front of you. I'm going to run through a couple of setup and rules for the game, and then we'll go ahead and play it. It is a 5-step system. You can see the mats in front of you. Each setup will have 1 die and 1 record sheet. You'll have 3 chips in your inbox right now, and if everybody could just double check that you have 3, except for the customer who has no inbox and no chips. You have a big mess of them there. Anybody not find that to be the case? All right, excellent. So this is a system that's going to mimic the accounts payable setup that we saw in the case study previous to this, and the system is designed to process chips. We're going to simulate a finite number of days, 20 days, and at each day you're going to roll the dice, and the roll of the dice is going to determine how many chips you have processed and are going to move through the system. So it's a very simple rule for how much work you're going to get done in any day. And one of the basic concepts is you can't pass more chips in any given roll than you have in your inbox. So we're going to do this a couple of demos just to get a feel for how this works. All right, so here's day 1. We're going to start out, you have a setup like this, just like you have in front of you. On day 1, everybody rolls a dice simultaneously. The customer rolls a 3, so the customer passes 3 chips into the mailroom. Mailroom rolls 2, passes 2 chips into PFR. Let's say PFR rolls a 5, but PFR's only got 3 chips sitting in the box, so they're only able to pass on 3 chips and not the full 5. So now what you have is lost capacity here. Say the analyst rolls a 1, so they can pass 1 chip on to pay. Pay rolls a 6. He's got lots of capacity that day and passes 3 chips on to the archive. And that's the conclusion of 1 day. All these things happen simultaneously, and don't wait for other people to pass you chips before you pass your chips on. So now this is what happens in day 2. So you're left with this setup at the beginning of day 2. You roll your dice like you have it here, and you have some cases of underutilized capacity. For example, here you'd roll a 5, but you can only pass 4 chips because that's the most you have. And then we're at the end of day 2. We're going to play for 20 days and see how things go. Now, each round, you have to record the jobs that you did and the work in progress on your sheet. So take a look at your mats. You have one inbox and one record sheet. So each day, you roll the die, you pass chips, you make your records. So if we wanted to highlight an example from what we just did, so this is analyst. Everybody starts with 3 whip. On day 1, the analyst rolled a 1, and she had 3 whip. She completed 1, and that was left with 2 more plus the original 3 in the whip, so now you have a whip of 5, and you're going to know how much whip you have just by looking at your inbox and counting. It's very simple. On day 2, the analyst completed 3 and ended up with a whip of 3 in the box. So now the customer's worksheet, those of you who are seated at table A or mat A, you've got a slightly different situation. You are going to be generating new jobs that flow into the system also by the roll of a die. So you are going to record your new jobs put into the process here. You are going to get the jobs completed by looking at the person whose station is labeled pay, that's letter E, and they're the person who's putting jobs into the archive bin, which is the done one. And then you're going to capture the jobs that are completed every round here. And then you're going to fill in your total whip column. Now what you'll notice is that there's actually a shortcut to calculating the total whip, people who are at the customer station, and this is detailed on your mat, I think. Yep, so your total whip, your new total whip, is your old total whip plus the new jobs minus the jobs complete. Kind of intuitive. So this is just filling in some of the calculations that we're illustrating down here on the shortcut, but I think this is pretty straightforward for all of you guys, being MIT students. So before we start the game, let's talk about what should happen here. We're going to think about 20 time periods or 20 days of work. So each day, you're going to have 3.5 chips that you processed, which is just the average of your dice roll. So intuitively to you, what should be the average throughput in the system over 10 days? How much?
3.5.
Yeah, 3.5 times 10, right? 35. And over 20, we ought to have double that, right? We ought to have 70. What do you think is the idealized flow time through this system? So how much time should it take one chip to pass through from the customer to being completed? Yeah, let's not think about the customers taking a day. So if you don't think about the customers being part of that day count, so once a chip's in the system, how long would it take to move through? 4 days. Because they process at a rate of 3.5. Okay. 70